like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down into the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, see, like, you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like that, man. The dust and wind, man. Or like a dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. It's all the time.
All right, Lucas Botkin, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How you doing, man?
Doing good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's good to finally get this going. You and I have some friends in common, and so it's always interesting when you have sort of a warm handoff. But I'm really excited to have you on. Now, obviously, I am familiar with who you are and what you've done. In fact, I use some of your old products basically every day.
Cool.
But some of my audience might not be. So, who are you, and what do you do?
So I'm a young, non-educated, no high school diploma, no college degree, homeschool kid who started a holster manufacturing company in 2013 in Middle Tennessee. So we made, holsters for modern handguns, mostly, no revolvers. And launched that company, marketed it on social media. This was, 2013, 2014, sort of at the height of, Instagram and some of the social media is going gangbusters. Facebook was kind of doing its thing, and it worked really well. Company was successful. We grew rapidly into a $40 million company over a decade. We were positioned really well for COVID. We started doing a lot of different kinds of products, nylon, body armor type products, plate carriers, things like that, retailing select products from other companies. And so we were it's kind of hard to say what the company was or is today, because it's sort of it was a blend of a retail company, a holster manufacturer, creating over 100,000 holsters a year up until recently when I left the company. And we were also designing and developing soft good nylon products as well. So we kind of did a little bit of everything, and also had a lot of media presence online. I'm a bit of I hate the word, but influencer, just because of my time on social media and because of some of the things that I did in the shooting space. We got pretty big on YouTube with a YouTube channel of 1.6 million subscribers. I think my top YouTube video has 12 million views on that channel. So a lot of people, in that firearm space know who I am. They know the kinds of things that I've been doing the last decade. And that's all I've done pretty much, is just work on that company, build that company, and some stuff has changed recently, but that's who I am. And that's what I've been doing for the last, 12 years now. It's not even 10. It's a little bit longer than that. So
I want to talk to you.
Short story.
I want to ask about being homeschooled, because I was homeschooled.
Oh, yeah.
And that has a certain negative connotation, right? In some settings. It was good for me. I basically was just a free range child and ran around the woods and read a bunch of books and, still can't spell with a gun to my head. But I'm curious, right? What was that like for you? And I mean, is that something you intend to do with your children when you have them?
So homeschooling it's different for everyone, right? Like, we've all met the weird homeschool kids. We've met the homeschool kids that were a little bit more normal, but still weird. I think that connotation is also a huge, gross stereotype, because if you look at public school kids from the last decade, they're even weirder in a lot of ways. In fact, that was one of the discussion points for me and my wife when we started dating. I think it was our second date. We got into deal breakers. I was like, we're doing this, deal breakers. Here they are. And one of mine was, we're going to homeschool, because I don't want to send my kids to school for tons of different reasons. And she was a little more on the fence. Like, she knew there were some issues in, the public schooling, private schooling. Like, she knew, but she, hadn't really thought about it a whole lot. But then as we saw things transpire with COVID, and as we saw things come out more about the trans agenda, things like that, she was like, oh yeah, we're not sending our kids to another institution where we're not able to really check in on what they're being taught. We're going to homeschool them ourselves. Now, we have every intention to bring in, tutors if we can, and we're going to work very hard so that we can do that, so they can get a high level of education and not just rely on us. Because math is not my strong suit. I can teach my kids business. I can teach my kids different things I've learned in my life, but there's certain aspects of traditional schooling, whatever that is, and that even needs some redefinition probably and development, that I'm not going to be able to teach them, and they'll have to get that from something else. But my homeschool background, it very much sounds very similar to yours. I ran around, we lived on a farm, so it was a lot of farm chores. It was not a lot of academic studies. It was a lot of, milking cows, putting up fencing, chickens, things like that. I hated reading. I always had to be doing something that was a lot more stimulating, and reading is just very slow and slow paced. And so I always hated that when I was younger. Loved playing video games. And then that usually that got throttled because I played way too many video games, and rules got put in place. So for me, my homeschooling education was, I think it was okay. I've known other homeschooling kids that it's way more academic, it's way more forced. And then I've also seen other kids where they're not allowed to read any books until they've memorized the Bible. And that caused serious issues with those kids, as I got to know them as they got older, because they just did not understand the world for what the world is. And that's not a good way to raise your kids. You have to raise your kids with an understanding of the world they live in, and you can't just sort of put them in a padded cell, utopian box. That's not setting your kids up for success. So I think my homeschooling situation, I think it was good. I think one of the things that was very helpful for me was I was taught I can learn anything, and that can be both good and bad. And I've seen that go both ways, where homeschoolers think they're so know-it-alls. I can teach myself anything. I don't need professionals. And it's like, well, hold on. Like, you actually do still need to rely on professionals who make this their life mission, who go study this thing for 10 years, this one thing. Like, yes, they're going to know more than you, even if you go read online for a couple hours. I think I got just the right amount of, I could teach myself, stuff, and I need to, but I also need to go rely on experts. And I learned that with my business, that it was a healthy amount for me, but I've seen that go wrong for other people in my some of my environment and some of my community that I came from, where they really thought they knew more than everyone else. And so the homeschooling, it's such a tough one because everybody tries to make it a formula. They try to say, teach your kids this much reading, this much history, this much math, this much, street smarts. And nobody really has it figured out. And every kid learns differently. Like for me, I love video games growing up. Eventually, it was sort of throttled and taken away from me, which is probably good. But all that video game playing now, I actually think was helpful for me in developing how I learn different things and how I multitask. I still play a lot of video games, some high-level video games, and that I know for a fact translates to a lot of my work and how well I'm able to work, how well I'm able to shoot, how well I'm able to make decisions, very fast decisions. And there's been tons of studies showing people who play video games, who grew up playing video games, people who didn't grow up playing video games, and the decision-making process and the problem-solving process between those two groups of people is radically different. And so I think, early on in my homeschooling, early on in the early 2000s, late 90s, video games bad for the most part. Most homeschooling parents thought that. But now I actually think some of that has to change, which is no, some video games are actually good for development. We live in an electronic, like, computer society where everything runs on computers. I actually want my kids to understand how all of that works, and they learn that through playing video games. I don't want them to just be stuck to reading a couple of books, because that's not going to teach them a whole lot to be successful. So we are going to homeschool, me and my wife. We're going to do it very differently than how we were raised. She went to public school. She went to college. She's a chemical engineer. So she's had a very traditional, schooling background. I had a very not traditional schooling background. And I think we're going to find something in the middle. And I think it's going to be really cool. I think our kids are going to be super involved in the businesses, not forced into being in the businesses. I think that could be a problem, but they're going to be in it and around it all the time, and going to, on the different business trips that we go on. They're going to see us working all the time. They're going to see my wife, talking to lawyers in the evening, or I'm talking to, some vendor, or I'm flying somewhere last minute, and they'll see that. And I think that's really good for them to see. And we also are trying to figure out how to make some of that more normal for them, or not normal, but let them understand. It's going to sound horrible. we don't want them to see how we live and think everyone lives that way, because it's not true. And so we're trying to figure out how to balance our crazy entrepreneur lifestyle to, hey, not everyone lives this way with these crazy schedules or eating fancy steaks sometimes or often or whatever, business dinners and stuff. This is how we do it because we've worked hard for it. And so we're trying to figure that out, and we're going to figure that out and make mistakes along the way. A very long-winded way to answer your question, but the homeschooling was good for me. I think some parts weren't, and some parts I had to learn the hard way, and that's okay. I mean, that's just how it is. I don't think anyone's schooling is perfect. So,
well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to that. So I was sort of half and half. I was homeschooled halfway through, and then my parents sent me to a Christian school, which I think was very good. You know, that there wasn't much more they could teach me, and I needed some structure in my life. But I think there's another part of it, which is kids really aren't all the same. And I was on a track before I was homeschooled to be put in like the special program, because I just refused to learn how to read. I was like, yeah, I don't want to do it. And, you know, the conclusion was, no, he's just really stubborn. There's nothing wrong with him per se. But I mean, you know, if you get set on that track at age 6, you're kind of cooked, right? Like it's difficult to break out of that. So I think that's certainly a part of it. And, you know, I'm glad you brought up, you know, raising kids in the business, because this is something I experienced. My grandfather was an entrepreneur for a variety of reasons. He, you know, did a lot of raising me, and that was incredibly positive. Because, you know, you mentioned, right, this, you know, sort of canard that homeschoolers are weird. And it's like, well, okay, well, weird compared to what, right? The average product of a public school, like good, you know, like you don't want to be that, you know?
Yeah.
But I think one of the really positive things is that I was exposed to a lot of, you know, real conversations with adults. I was doing runs with him. He would make me go in and talk to a vendor, you know, talk to a customer, something like that. And so very quickly, something that a lot of people don't develop until their mid or, you know, early 20s, right? How to talk to an adult was something that was just expected. And that's not something you can put on a standardized test, right? I mean, like, can you imagine, right, filling out like the eye contact bubble on the SAT? It sounds stupid, but that's a very real skill set. And honestly, you know, what you said right off the rip there about, you know, what is going on in public schools, like, my wife worked as a public school teacher. She taught art for elementary, so it's not like the most technical thing. But a large part of the reason that she left is, even in a conservative area, for whatever that's worth, she was seeing what was going on, right? The sort of other people that were getting hired, what they were trying to communicate to kids. And it's like, well, not only do I certainly not want my children doing that, but, you know, you sort of feel guilty by association. Like, wait a minute, I'm working as part of an organization that promotes these sort of values. So I want to go back to, you know, you founding a business, right? Because you mentioned, right, you don't have a high school diploma, you don't have a college degree, you don't have, in my mind, the most useless piece of paper in the world, an MBA, right?
Oh yeah.
What does that look like, right? By the way, I've met literally one impressive person with an MBA, and he was an impressive person before who got one for free. So it's
exactly.
Like, fair enough. For everyone else, it's just like, okay, I can discount everything you're about to say. But sorry, sidebar issue.
No, you're correct. On that, I had a funny story where I've only interacted with one person with an MBA, and it was from social media, and he was talking just mad crap about how I didn't know anything about business. And so I got in the DMs, or he DM'd me, and I was just like, he was like, I could do a better job if I was in your position. And this is back in like 2019. So we were already doing like 30 million in sales, something like that. So I was like, okay, man, what would you do? Like, tell me, what would you do different? And he was like, oh, well, I can't, you know, and he couldn't give me anything, not even a single suggestion, even seeing the business. And I finally pressed him on it. It was just like, yeah, you've never run a business. You never started a business. You don't know anything about business. And you're talking to a guy who's been doing it for 6 years. Like, you know, good luck out there. And he didn't have anything for that. But anyway, so long story short, so starting the business was interesting. And I think this is an interesting part of my story that has resonated with a lot of people. So I was the laziest person in our family, like by far, to the point I would get poked and prodded about it. I don't want to say made fun of, because that sounds really bad. But it was
encouraged. Yeah.
I don't even know if I would say it was more like just statements that would just get made.
Yeah.
Like, you're so lazy. You know, it wasn't really an encouragement. So everyone knew it in the family. I would try to get out of work. I'd pawn it off on my younger brother. Eventually, I learned to like the farm work. I hung out with actually someone who was a bad influence on me when I was like 15. He was a farm country kid. But the interesting thing with that was I learned to like work from him, even though he was a problematic influence just character wise. He did seem to like the work and he would do the work, and I picked that up from him. So you can still learn things from questionable people. And so I started to like the farm work, but I was still lazy. And so as soon as I had something that was interesting to me and compelling to me, which was this business and making these products, I was all in. And I mean, all in. That's all I did. I didn't play video games. I didn't go to parties. I didn't spend a whole lot of time at church after lunch. Like I usually wanted to go like take a nap or sleep because I was working literally 6 days a week all the time. That's all I did. I was so invested and so obsessive um, that I think that the obsessiveness from wanting to play video games all the time when I was younger translated as soon as I found an outlet. And I've heard this from a lot of other young men who are super like ADHD, lazy, whatever. It's because everything around them is so boring and dull that they have to find something more interesting to grab their attention, like video games. You've got economy, you've got action, you've got reaction time, decision making. Depending on what kinds of video games you're playing, they're insanely mentally stimulating. And then you look at real life, and a lot of it's like pretty boring compared to that. It just is. And so if someone's listening to this who maybe has a kid who seems like that, where nothing around them compels them, they may be one of these kids where no, they need something so high risk, so challenging, so interesting to them for them to go from video games that are also interesting to, super complicated, hard to solve, compelling project, business, whatever it is, to actually capture their attention. And that's what happened to me. So I started the company. I had like $1,000 from an inheritance. A grandparent died and I got a little bit of money. And the tooling was cheap, $400 in some parts. It was Harbor Freight tools from China, and was able to make this stuff by hand. And which was super fortunate because a lot of products that you can't get into it that cheap. And I just I would sell a few and then I would buy more stuff. And I literally was funding it as I went. There was no like massive capital infusion to run things. And it was slow. The first year it was painfully slow, but I was so focused on that I guess I didn't really care about how long it was taking because, it's all I had and I was just deep into it. That I just went in every day, made holsters. And in the first winter, there was no heating and air conditioning. So I'd bundle up with like multiple jackets and make like 5 holsters and then go home and send emails and ship them out like the next day. And I did that for a year before things started to really take off. And that's often what it takes. And in my case, thankfully, providentially, I had a simple product I could make by hand, didn't require a whole lot of capital. People online were willing to trust me with their money, and I was able to move the product and then market it on social media. Didn't spend a dime on marketing, traditional marketing, until I want to say 2018. It was all just self-marketed through social media. And the timing, this is where people say like luck in business. And I kind of agree with the concept. I also don't like it because it can take away from the hard work people do. But there was definitely a luck or providence component of, I started this back when social media was fresh and new and it wasn't censored. Instagram wasn't coming down on gun stuff yet. I was definitely there at the right time. That definitely helped. But I still had to be the one to identify that, post every day, figure out what to post, figure out what not to post, figure out when to delete a comment, when not to delete a comment. Like I still had to learn all that. But that's what it was like starting the business. There's a lot more I could say, but like it was just coming in and doing the same thing every day. But for me, it was so much multitasking, emails, product development, manufacturing, marketing, social media. It was like playing a video game. It's almost identical to playing a video game. It was just in real life, which is cool.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. It's something I see as well, where like a normal life, right? Whatever you want to qualify that as, where it's like, you have some sort of like 9-to-5 job with a certain amount of benefits. And let's be honest, many of these jobs are not particularly difficult. there's a large kind of social safety net. You may not be rich, you may not have a great life, but the kind of bare minimum level of existence is really not that hard to do, right? Like it's not something where it takes that sort of, advanced level of decision making. And additionally, right, and I see a lot of guys, I'm in my mid-20s, so I see a lot of guys kind of at this stage where it's like, once they get that, it's kind of like, well, why would I, like, working, X% harder doesn't get me that much more. So all my attention, all of my energy is going into, something like video games or, maybe some other kind of more, like nefarious vice. Right. And I think a large part of that is that, in that setting, a lot of people are kind of insulated from making decisions, to be honest. Like, what you do moment to moment doesn't matter that much. It's not exciting. There's no risk to it. And to be honest, there's, in many cases, there's not that much reward. So, like, you read all these articles or you see these headlines about, Gen Z is checking out. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's not a good thing. But you can kind of understand it, right? Because it does feel like, okay, like if everything around you is kind of pointless, right? It feels as if there's no direct correlation. Like, you can at least understand it. Like, it's not the correct thing to do, but it is, from a certain perspective, rational. And as someone who's fairly recently kind of struck out on my own, right? I don't have a real job anymore, per se. It's kind of scary, right? Because you basically are jumping. You don't have that safety net. And if you mess up, it's not like you get fired, per se. It's like the thing you built goes away and you're a loser, right? But at the same time, like, and you're sort of grabbing on to that, like what, Ted Kaczynski, the famous mail bomb guy, would have called like the power process, right? Making decisions that actually matter for you. And like, aside from any financial motivation, that's incredibly motivating because you're actually doing something real. It's not like you're sort of doing something for someone else. I don't know. It's not the most elegant way to put it, but once you've had a taste of it, I almost feel like you can never go back.
For sure. And this has been a frustration for me, is the entrepreneur bro marketing. Because like, I would love for there to be more entrepreneurial people, but the reality is there's just not a lot, and there's a reason for it. Not everyone's wired to handle it. Now, I think you're touching on something though that's super important, and that is right now there's sort of this sort of, it's a spectrum, right? Everything is, but there's a spectrum of how checked out people want to be with their, I don't want to say their life, but their job, right? They it's very predictable. They have a salary. They could plan their life around their 60 grand or whatever, 80 grand, whatever it is. They go into work, not a lot's expected of them. They could do this stuff. They can go home and they can do football. They can play video games. They can do that thing that they like to do. And there's tons of people that are okay with that. That's just how they're wired. That's how they're driven. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have all the entrepreneur bros or people like me or whoever who are saying, everyone needs to be like us. And the reality is, well, that's impossible. That's not going to happen. But I do think there's this area in the middle, which is finding more compelling, interesting things for people in today's era, because young men are surrounded by so many distractions. I mean, video games are the best example. Why go work at a factory where you're doing this super mundane thing when I could stay home and play the most high-paced, competitive video game that I feel like, my performance matters because I'll let the team down. Competitive team-based video games feel super purposeful, super meaningful, especially battle royales. When those came out, I think that cooked a whole generation of young men, good and bad in both ways, because it's just so meaningful playing a game like that where you're if your team is the best and you get to the end, you win and you beat everyone, and you beat 100 other people. So there's this area in the middle that for young men's or for today's workforce where can we offer a more compelling lifestyle to men that outweighs or at least is equal to the distractions of today, like video games, where they want to go to work. They want to go and create stuff. They want to design product. They want to make stuff for, today's warfighters or for, first responders or these people over here, or they work in the food industry, which is super important because food is, how we stay alive. Like, how do we make that work so compelling? And I think there's some people that are starting to hit the nail on the head in the reindustrialization movement where they're starting to say, we need to make manufacturing more like a video game, where it is more rewarding, it's more simplified, it's more understandable, it's more teachable, so people can get it a little bit better. And I think they're starting to maybe go down that road of figuring out how to, I don't want to say gamify because that starts to make it sound like Wall-E, but make it where it's more attractive and understandable to people, that what they're doing is important and there is a reward behind doing it. And it's not just this mundane work that they go and do. And so my frustration with the Entrepreneur Bros is how much they tell people like, your life sucks unless you're one of us. And I'm like, well, not everyone's going to go put up literally all their money, their house, their cars, take great risk. Like, not everyone's wired that way. They just aren't. I'm doing that right now. I'm putting up literally everything to start 2 new companies. I love it. I'm stressed, a few times out of the week, like looking at the ceiling at night, but like, I'm okay with that. Like, I have no problem doing that. Most people aren't wired that way. They need a little bit more safety. They need a little more cushion. They're not maybe as creative. But it's finding that middle ground for people where they can feel really fulfilled with their 9 to 5, with their 4-10, like whatever, work situation they're in. And that's my goal with my new companies. And I even had a long discussion with my wife last night about a manufacturing company I'd like to start. And we talked about, well, how do we make the people on the manufacturing floor feel like specialists and technicians? They're not just manufacturers. They're salaried. They have these kinds of benefits. They can work whatever hours they want. Like, how do we build a structure where they feel like they're all part of the team for this really important thing, and they're not just a cog in the machine? And I love to hear, whenever I hear business owners thinking that way, I think that's what's required now because of the competition we have with video games and other distractions. We never had that before. People didn't know what they were missing out on if they worked at a potato factory back in the 60s. They didn't know what else was out there besides war. They probably didn't want to go to war because of all the stories they had heard. But now, well, it's a little bit harder to attract people to work because of the cool stuff that we have right in front of us at all times on computers and on our phones. Like, it's very difficult.
Oh yeah. Well, and there's also another element too, where, because those things like, video games or like, sports betting or porn or, like all these like synthetic drugs are kind of more potent than the original thing, right? You can sort of fry your dopamine receptors. So like, I have not played, I basically took like 10 years off of Call of Duty from like roughly about the like Black Ops 2 era on.
Okay. That was the right call. That was the right call.
100%. Yeah. And so like coming back to, I guess it would have been like during COVID. So like Modern Warfare 2019 ish. I felt like I was like a caveman that had been like handed like a Monster Energy or something. Yeah. I was like, what in the world is going on? There's so many like stings and like, it's like Nicki Minaj running around with a shovel, just beating me.
Oh, you got in the wrong one. Oh, I feel sorry for you. Yeah.
Well, but my point being, right? Like even the same medium, right? Video game, the same franchise or whatever from, that rough, let's just say, 5 to 10 year period. It's like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I am overstimulated. And that's like an amusing anecdote, right? It's a little bit much, but you think about that on every level where it's like you are like kind of exposing your body to like super normal stimulus. And so that reward mechanism of like, I did something, I feel good about it, right? Not only does that take way longer than a 45-minute, 64v64, multiplayer match or whatever, but also you're getting like those crazy engineered, right? We know that, companies like, the big AAA developers have whole divisions basically designed to biohack you, again, like that doesn't make it okay to while away your entire life, one victory royale at a time, but it is a huge trap. One thing I want to talk about one thing I want to respond to, that's how a person would say it in English, is what you said about, bringing manufacturing back, because a lot of the kind of, mainstream on this issue will say it's impossible. We can't do it anymore. People won't do those jobs. And I assume you disagree because one, you've done it and you're continuing to do it. So if you could just kind of give me your thoughts about, reindustrialization, both why it's important and, how you've gone about it.
So I was invited to. So I'll just say this, full disclaimer. When I left my previous company last year, May, I kind of was like, you know what? I don't want to do manufacturing again. I want to do design development. There's other factories here in the States. I can, have make the stuff for me because they're good at it. Like they've been doing it for forever. Big factories, 300 employees, 400 employees, and we'll just do design, marketing, development, innovation. And I got invited to this event in Detroit called Reindustrialization, a super cool event. And what's the phrase? It was way above my pay grade. I mean, there's people there with like $3 billion in VC money, and the lead of Skunkworks spoke, and the CEO of Ford. Big names are there. Eric Prince was there. Palmer Luckey tuned in via a robot. He wasn't there in person, but he had a robot delivered with his Hawaiian shirt on. It was great. And I just sat there listening to the discussion around how important it is to bring manufacturing back for national security, but also for prosperity. And one of the guys who actually had one of the points that I liked the most was the CTO of Palantir. And that's Palantir's whole discussion. But he said that America has always been at its best when it's been on its back foot. And he was talking about World War II as an example, where the Germans were producing so much stuff, from a very small country. Their industrialization was so good. They were out building, out manufacturing everyone. And the States, we were actually pretty lame back then. But we recognized that. We tooled up. There was a lot of marketing surrounding it. I mean, obviously Rosie the Riveter and all this different stuff. Lots of propaganda. There were lots of incentives as well from the government. And there was also some strong arming of factories like, hey, you're not going to make this anymore. You're going to make bombs. Like, too bad. Like, you have to make bombs now. It's like that funny meme. But in that moment, America transitioned and it was able to meet the needs for that particular conflict and succeed. And so his point was just, if we can recognize that the U.S. is on its back foot right now with China, with some of these other countries, and just in the geopolitical space, we can fix this country. Now, he was speaking about it from a defense posture standpoint. I heard that and went, no, I think he's actually talking about manufacturing as a whole. If our consumer goods can actually operate that way as well, where we recognize, hey, we're getting all of our clothing from overseas. We're getting most of our food from overseas. We're getting all of our electronics from, Taiwan or superconductors, like all that stuff. If we can recognize we need to bring that stuff back and treat it like defense in that same mindset, we can bring manufacturing back. But I think there's a component there that is not being talked about enough. And I was at that event listening for anyone who would talk about it, and nobody did. And that was, well, how do we make it cool again? How do we make manufacturing cool to the people of America so they want to do it? And what a lot of people don't realize, there was a cool story recently during the shutdown that was about a month long. There was a Wall Street trader. I think he was a Wall Street trader. He's some government guy there in New York who was out of a job for a month because he wasn't getting paid. And he went out to sell hot dogs at a hot dog stand. And he said that was the most fulfilling thing he's done in his life in like 20 years, because he knows the job he's doing is pointless. It's just numbers on a board. But he went out and actually served food to people. And I saw that article and I was like, aha, he just experienced it. He gets it now. And that is, we are all born to create. God created us, and in the process, I believe, have this innate desire to also create. I wouldn't say in his image, but sort of a similar concept. We want to create stuff too, and most people haven't been able to create anything. They work these stupid jobs that are just numbers on a spreadsheet, or they play video games where you're not making anything, but you're experiencing things. But the second you get someone who can actually be involved in making a product, and they can see it getting produced, they see it going to a customer, and they know how it impacts them, that completely changes how someone sees manufacturing. And all the guys that I've hired for the new companies, they come into work early, they leave late. They talk about, I want to come into work, and they think about it on the weekend because they're all creating things and they've all experienced that. And so there's a component there with reindustrialization that has to be talked about. And that is, how do we get people to experience creation of product? Anything, right? It doesn't really matter. Just like product in general, from taking scrap to finished artisan, whatever it happens to be. And how do we make it cool to attract them to getting in and doing that? Because the second they do it, they get the bug, Like it bites them, and it bites them hard, like Spider-Man or something. And so that's the piece I'm trying to figure out, is how to make work cool. And I'm trying to do that with my new businesses, with the behind the scenes stuff and filming and talking about it and going on a podcast like this. That is the purpose and the meaning that is missing in so many young men's lives, because a lot of them, I don't want to generalize, but a lot of them don't work a job that actually creates value. And there's this book I've been reading, Bullshit Jobs by, I always forget the guy's name, but he talks about how in the last 30 years, like, all these stupid jobs have been created, like HR, weird admin, like all these weird jobs that don't, and the people working
project
them
managers.
know. Yeah, managers, like, they know they're not creating anything. They know there's no value, but it's a paycheck. They come in, they collect it, they leave, they go home, they play video games, they do football, they do whatever. Or there's some sort of consultant. I have to say that lightly because I like some consultants, but most are a farce. But those jobs don't create. They don't actually create anything. And so I think that's what's missing right now in the manufacturing, is we can't bring manufacturing back to the States until we solve that. If we're able to solve that, and we're able to create a compelling work environment, compelling pay as well, that's a very big component, some decent benefits, we're not forcing people to work 70-hour weeks. 410s is a great model. Then we can bring it back. And if the government also can ease up on the taxes, because honestly, that's a huge component that's crushing manufacturing, is taxes. We can bring it back, but some of those things are going to have to get fixed for it to be readily accessible to more people to start. But there's been little improvements, like the government just opened, the Trump admin, $10 million SBAs for manufacturing as opposed to 5. And that opens up lots of possibility for people to go buy certain machines and start doing it, and have a little bit more buffer of money to survive those first few years while they get, clients spun up and employees trained. But that's just a start. A lot of things have to change. But yeah, my intent is to focus on manufacturing here. I will say it's hard. It's tough, but it is doable. As I've been able to do before, and as we're going to do again.
Yeah, there's several things there. Like, literally for past 10 years, right? You've been hearing about this kind of crisis of meaning, right? That you have people who feel like their life is pointless. Like, you can look to the deaths of despair, the people who, aren't technically dead, but might as well be. And obviously it's multivariate, the fact that these people don't have, a community, they don't have a religious community, let alone a social one. But I think another part of that is the fact that, for many people, work feels purposeless, right? There's not a connection between the decisions you make and any real thing. I think of one of my buddies who's, a very hard worker, very talented, but he's a financial analyst. And he's literally like, I know these people aren't reading them. I work hard, I stay late, I do a good job, and it doesn't matter, right? They're not going to look at it anyway. And it's incredibly disheartening. And so I think that that's a very compelling vision, right? Like, you can be making something, you can be producing something. And I think your point about, being made in the image of God, obviously it's stupid. No one actually believes that, like, God looks like us exactly, right? That's not what that means, right? It's something spiritual. But, like, look, like, God charged Adam, right? Name the animals, create order, make something. And it's a reason that is, like, the most, compelling, that is the most meaningful. And it doesn't mean, like, artistic creation in every instance, but, like, that's what people are designed to do. And sure, like, you know what? Like, you pay me $3 million, I'll make you spreadsheets that don't matter. Fine, whatever. You can, on the extreme end, I might be able to, grit and bear it. But I think, again, when, like, the situations are where it's like, you aren't going to starve to death. Like, realistically, if you don't have that gun to your head, like, the difference between welfare and, like, a shitty low end job where you're doing something that doesn't matter, like, that's really a huge difference. And so, again, it's not right, but it is understandable why people feel checked out, right? There's nothing connecting what they do to anything that matters. And on the back end, on the consumer level, because I think about this a lot, where it's like, I would and have been willing to pay more for a product where it's connected to someone like me, right? Like, someone else is supporting their family off this product. So I'll pay, $100 for something made out of aluminum I could get on AliExpress for 15, because it's like, well, to be honest, I don't really want slaves making this. I don't think that that's a good thing to do, to have some, Chinese school child, stamping this out, only for them to end up on Live Leak 3 weeks later. And I think that that's something else as well. And I not to criticize American conservatives, but to criticize American conservatives. I feel like a lot of people in that culture, which, look, it's my culture, I love those people, have a hard time talking about something that isn't, purely financial. And so it's like, oh, well, it's cheaper to do it this way, or it's more efficient. And it's like, sure, it may or may not be, right? There's a whole bunch of other things that make that Chinese product cheaper or more expensive that you can't, just, dismiss out of hand. But also, I'd much rather live in a country where a entry level working class job is enough to support a family on, where it's I again think about my grandparents, where it's like they had working class jobs and they were able to support a family and have a house. I think that that is a desirable thing. And again, the messaging to the consumer, right? That's a compelling thing to sell people, right? That you are, part of something more than just kind of a simple, exchange of value. But that may be too chin stroking, just something I think about it.
I think you're hitting something on the head. So look at all the problems that we have today, the geopolitical, the riots, all the problems. I think a lot of these problems have been downstream of our country going from being a country that manufactures a bunch of cool stuff to, no, we just make ideas and we export foreign policy and democracy to other countries and we're there to save them. That's our product. And the people of the country down the road feel that. They're not necessarily part of a country that's creating things. And I think that's a huge reason we have a lot of the divide that we have today, and the people who are able to just run around and, destroy so quickly because they weren't ever involved in creating in the first place. And I think our country would be more orderly if we were a country of manufacturing and creating things. I mean, that's throughout history, that's always how it was. When a country was known for its export of fine product or manufacturing, it was generally a more orderly country. And the US, I mean, look at the entertainment. This is actually a great example. Most YouTubers can't do YouTube longer than and I say the good ones, right? The ones who are making millions of dollars. They quit at 10 years. And I think they do it. I think some of them don't know exactly why, but they feel like there's no purpose for what they're doing. And maybe they haven't been able to put it into words, but I think it's because they know they're not actually creating anything. They're creating entertainment, which that is a product. That is a thing you could feel good about. People tell you, thank you for doing that. Got me through a hard time. And you can feel good about that and meaningful. But it's not the same as actually creating a product that someone's using or clothing or food, whatever it happens to be, or shelter, construction. It's not the same. It hits different. And I just saw, I don't know if it's real or if it's a stunt, but the big Twitch streamer Kai Cenat, huge, big Twitch, he was the biggest phenomenon for the last few years. I guess he's quitting. And I haven't watched his video about why he's quitting. I don't really want to, but I would surmise that a lot of it is he wasn't feeling purposeful and just generating slop content. And the problem is so much of the consumer market, because folks, what we've been watching for the last few decades in the United States are not manufacturing people getting put on a pedestal or inventors. We see politicians, celebrities, Twitch streamers, YouTubers, and those aren't the people that are known for creating important, compelling things. They're all doing entertainment is what it is. And if we're a country of entertainment, well, we're not going to be a very meaningful society of people. We just aren't. We're going to be plagued with all these problems and people that are willing to go destroy because they have never created anything in their life, or maybe they haven't created very much. And so I really think that's the downstream effect of our country transitioning from, being self-reliant on our own manufacturing, exporting all of it during the boomer generation, and then turning into, hey, we're entertainment central. We have, OnlyFans, and we have Twitch, and we have Hollywood, and we have all this stuff, and we have the biggest political system in the world that's a world stage for everyone in the world to watch. It's not just our own country. Everyone watches what we do. There's so much money dumped into politics, and it doesn't create anything. Not at all. And so until we fix that, or at least balance it a little bit more, we're going to have a hard time getting people to be interested in creating things again, because we're a country of consumers. So I really think that's the downstream. We're feeling the downstream effect right now, and it's why so many people say we can't bring manufacturing back. We've been consumers for too long, and yeah, those people are probably not the ones who are going to do anything about it. But then there's people like me and a bunch of other folks who are like, no, it's hard. It doesn't cost double. It costs plus 30% to do it in America. We can do it, and people can pay a little extra until we get the government to ease up on taxes and some of the different things so that the prices can be competitive. And that's something a lot of people don't understand. Making stuff in America doesn't cost double. It is like plus 30%. It's not a whole lot more. There's some clever things you can do to skip some of the margins, especially if you're willing to, you're not trying to just suck everyone dry and make millions of dollars. Like, as far as I'm concerned, like I've told my wife and all the guys working for us know this, I don't have to make millions every year. If I can be like clean, just everyone's paid for, everything's paid for, investors are taken care of, banks are taken care of, the employees are taken care of, buildings paid for, materials are paid for, my house, I could still eat, have shelter. That's enough for me. If we could just run everything, I don't have to put away, 50% margin, 60% margin, any of this crap, as long as everything works. Cause I know I'll have purpose in my life. All my employees are taken care of. We're creating badass products for people. And what more can you ask for? Like I don't want to say that's life, but that's what life is. That's what life should be. Things like that. I don't need to stack a bunch of Lamborghinis and crazy stuff, but the people that have made money their focus are the people who are outsourcing to China because they want to hit that 70 points of margin so that they do make, 30% profit margin at the end of the year so that they have millions and millions of dollars. And that's their pursuit. Or, making their shareholders happy, which is a whole nother discussion. So yeah, we're a country of consumers. Until that changes, it's going to be hard to make manufacturing cool in America again. So,
well, I think that, one other aspect of this as well. And, Burnham's Managerial Revolution is a really interesting book, right? It was actually the inspiration for 1984. George Orwell read this book and was like, this sounds so horrible. It sounds like a horrible totalitarian society. Just a music bit of trivia there. But one of the things that Burnham talks about is the transition from what he calls capitalism to managerialism. And he talks about, like, even back in the 30s when he was writing this, he's like, well, like, find me a capitalist. Like, when Ford Motor Company started, you could go into the office on the factory and, shake Mr. Ford's hand, and he made all the decisions. Where, shortly afterwards, well, yeah, sure, there's still a chairman of the board who's named Ford, but really, like, the company's broken up. It's all these tiny little bits of paper that really no one's in control of. And so the company is run by managers, right? Who have a very different set of goals. They're an employee, right? They want to make a lot of money. They want their stock options to look a certain way. They don't want to mess everything up so they can get another, 7-figure job at another firm. And I think that that's a really big difference, right? The difference between a company that is run by a guy who can make a choice like what you've made versus, if you're a CEO, well, are you going to turn to your shareholders and say, I could be giving you 30% more profit and I decided not to? Like, I mean, maybe you can, some do, but you're not going to be as popular as, some brand new, or not some brand new, but some Harvard Business School graduate who says, I can make every one of your checks 30% bigger, right? And so I think that's an important dynamic. But one thing I want to bring up, because we are, sort of coming to the end of the hour here, is you have made no secret of your faith on, a number of, shall we say, controversial issues, right? And
Sure.
Look, like, you and I are perhaps biased on this, but, 10 or 15 years ago, that was much more controversial, especially in kind of the 2A space. Now, being a religious extremist is kind of cool, at least a little bit more than it used to be.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, could you speak to that a little bit? Because I think that's kind of interesting, right? You were doing it before it was cool in an area that was much more like big L libertarian than I think it is now. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh, 100%. It's an interesting topic because I get criticism on both sides of the aisle. I'll get other Christians, and Christianity, as everyone knows listening to this, is a wide swath of belief and how people live it out. But I'll get Christians on one end who are like, Lucas, you don't do enough. You need to be posting verses everywhere and put them on a product like ChurchCon. And we even had debates at the old company about that. Like, do we put on the front page of our website that we're a Christian company and all these verses? And I always pushed back on that and said, no. It's not about saying it. It's about living it out and doing it. I want people to know we're a Christian company based on how we interact with customers, how we take care of them, how we interact with employees, how we take care of them. I don't want us to just put it up on our site. And the second we do that, the standard people are going to hold for our company is going to be completely different than if they just go, oh, this company's really cool. I bought a product from them and I had a problem and they immediately took care of it. They did this other thing, or they took this stance on a specific political issue, and they see how we actually, live it out in our day-to-day life. And I think that's, nothing's black and white, but I do think this is actually kind of a more black and white issue. At least to me, it's you have Christians who say they're Christian and they proclaim it very loudly. And then you have people who just don't say it, they live it and they do it. And I think that's much more of a Christ-like life. Jesus didn't go around telling everyone, hey, I'm Jesus, everyone, he would just go and interact with them. And he would say, encouraging things to them. He would, tell them to go and sin no more. But he wasn't running around saying, everyone, I'm the Son of God. And he didn't start every conversation like that. He went and lived it out with the Gentiles and with the Jews. And it's one reason the main reason he was hated is he was actually living it out. He wasn't just proclaiming the law and saying, hey, I'm the Son of God. And so my whole approach for living out my faith, as a public figure, as an influencer, as a whatever, is people need to see me living it out in action more than they may hear it, me say it or a verse that's posted, something like that. And I think that leaves a more effective testimony, especially in an era right now where everything is just fake and gay. Anyone can put a Bible verse, like you see it. You see the chicks who post a bikini photo and then they have a verse underneath. That's not living it out. It's just not. I don't think anyone is going to defend that and say, oh my gosh, like she's living out her faith. Look, she has a cross and she's taking a photo of the top section of her body. It's like, no, I don't think that's living out her faith at all, or maybe not very much, maybe not very meaningful, but we need men and women who actually live it out before they tell people, oh, the reason I did this thing, or I said this thing, or I took this stance on this issue is because I believe it from reading the Word of God. That's why I took this stance on this issue. And so that's been my whole approach this whole time is I want people to know me by my fruit. And if they want to ask, and they want to interact with it at a deeper level, we'll do that. We'll talk about it. But I'm not going to be this guy who can run around and, spout scripture and memorizations and things like that. I do that on one side, and then on the other side, I don't do any of the things that are actually required of me, which I've seen so much from the Christian community. They'll use the Bible when they can to win an argument, a certain passage, a certain verse, a certain area. We've all seen it, but they never live it out. And they never actually read either the second part of the verse or apply it to their own life. And they're being a Pharisee. And that's the last thing I want is for people to look at me and say, oh, Lucas is being a Pharisee. He's posting the law, or he's posting verses when it's good for the specific issue, and he won't live up to it on these other issues. And I've definitely done that in the past. I've been way too judgmental on certain topics. I've definitely come down on one issue, and then maybe I didn't talk about another one, which might have been me not doing it on purpose, or just I missed it because there's so much just stuff going on. But I never want that said of me as, oh, Lucas is just a pharisaical Christian. I want people to be able to say, no, he actually lives it out in what he does. And he says what he means. He doesn't back down from doing the right thing. And I have a long ways to go. I could definitely be, far better and more righteous than I am. But I think we need more of that. We need more men and women who live it before they say it. And sadly, with social media and the internet, so many Christians learned, especially as it got cool, like you said, it became cool to go, Christ is King, and show like my a horrible story. I mean, this is a perfect example of it. About 5 years ago, there were some guys that I knew, and they posted a Bible study in their social media on their story. They made it look like they had a Bible study that morning. And a friend of mine asked them when he saw them that day, he said, well, hey, where were y'all reading? What was your Bible study on? And they went, oh, we didn't have a Bible study. And they were completely flippant and willing to admit that they posted it for people to think they were reading scripture and having a Bible study. But they weren't doing that. They just posted it because it's so easy to pretend to be whoever you want to be on the internet, unless it's, so we don't have a whole lot of authentic Christians out there right now, in my opinion, who are living it, because it is so easy to just put it on the internet. Everyone thinks you're this really righteous, amazing person. And that was just the 1% they wanted you to see. They wanted you to see that they had a Bible study with their perfectly steamed cup of coffee with the perfect little swirl. They were posting the coffee mug. They weren't posting the Bible. Like they wanted you to see their coffee setup. And it's saddening to me that's how people's Christian life can be summed up, is in just a social media story post that expires in 24 hours and was actually just a picture of their coffee cup. But that's most people's Christianity today. And I'll get flack for saying that. I don't care. People know it's true. And I'm hoping that, again, this goes with the whole purpose thing we talked about earlier. As men feel more purposeful in their daily life working, because let's face it, all of us think more about work and our daily life more than we'll think about Christ, and we'll think about praying. Even though it says we're supposed to pray without ceasing, none of us are praying all the time because we have other responsibilities. We have everything. So none of us are doing it. So the fact of the matter is, we're all going to spend more time working, spend more time with our friends, spend more time with our wives than we're going to spend thinking about Christ. So if our life doing those things can be meaningful, I believe that will draw us closer to Christ, because we'll have a more meaningful life that we'll be able to draw experience from. And now when I read the Bible, I'm like, man, like I lived that thing that it's talking about. I understand this piece of scripture now. I didn't understand it when I was 13 when I read it. But now that I have life experience and I've worked these kinds of jobs and I've worked with these kinds of people and I've worked with some crappy people, like now I understand what it's talking about. And so people need to be in environments where they're getting that experience so that they can draw closer to Christ. They have to have that. I don't want to say they have to have that, but it's very helpful. So I have no intention of backing down from my living out my businesses from a faith-based perspective. But what I also won't do is, and I there were some temptations, but I was like, I'm not doing it. When it got real edgy to be like, I'm a Christian, Christ is King, all that, I had some temptations to jump in on that too, but I was like, no, I'm not doing that. Everyone else is doing that right now. They're saying it because it's cool. They're saying it because it's trendy. They're selling Bibles covered in camouflage for a bunch of money at a profit, which that's a whole other thing that I think is disrespectful to the Word of God, doing things like that for a profit. And I was just like, you know what? Like, this is always going to exist. There's always going to be people in the temple that need to be driven out by a scourge and a whip, which is what Jesus did. And, I'm not going to be able to do that for everyone, but I'm going to keep doing what I can do. I'm going to keep interacting with the people in my immediate circle the way I believe is right. And if that's able to be an encouragement to other people, then mission accomplished. And I hope that, when I die and I go before the judgment seat, God will say, well done, good and faithful servant. That's the goal. And I think we get that by living it out, while also having faith, doing both. It's not just works-based, but actually living our faith out.
Yeah, there are several things there, which is one, Lucas, you've made a core mistake, which you have violated the Jay Burden school of social media, which is immediately block and or mute any woman you see. It makes the whole experience about 10 times better. Drama related to, didn't see it. Drama caused by, also didn't see it. Kind of joking, of course, but I think that, and I'm friends with, I am not at all, for any number of reasons, an Orthodox Christian, but I know a number of people who are. And I see what's going on there, right? Where there's a number of like motifs and images which have become, trendy and cool, right? People like how that looks. And so you have this, large influx of people, and, a great many of them, turn that into kind of a real sincere, faith relationship. But as someone whose religious community went through a very similar thing where, the kind of church that I go to is very trendy in the mid 2000s. It's actually pretty helpful to see what it's like after the hype fades, right? When it's no longer the it thing, because sure, there's some growth to it, but that thing mattered more, right? Than, simply the kind of social media or the kind of herd mentality around it. And that comes and goes, right? Being public about faith is currently in kind of an upswing. Whereas in the kind of 2014 era of, gun culture, it was very much not cool, right? It was a different look, and I'm using gun culture, but it applies to many other cultures as well. And I think that, there's certainly something to be said. I mean, there's something positive about that, right? We want people to be looking at, Christ and, a sincere relationship with him as a positive thing. But I think it's also very important to remember that that is incredibly fleeting. Much like you said, a YouTuber has a 10-year career, like, an online religious fad, if it has a 10-year run, I'll be shocked. I'll put it that way. And on a less serious note, I'll be honest, when I saw it, it was funny. It was a screenshot designed to discredit you, but you called some dude a faggot on Facebook. And I was like, that's my guy. That's the kind of guy I'll support. Hey, because again,
let your yes be yes or your no be no. I call it like I see it.
That's a word that I will never, one, stop using, or two, stop thinking is really funny, especially in like, a corporate environment where those sort of terms are heavily discouraged. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, dude, this has been a ton of fun. I really enjoyed speaking with you. Obviously, you have a new company, you have some social media. Where can people find you if they're interested?
So Instagram is still, there's just some good activity on there. Twitter's it's the PvP server of social media. So it
100%, is. Yep.
I get something out of it, but man, I click into that app like twice a day and that's it. Instagram, still some wholesome stuff there. Lucas Botkin _ is how people can find me on there. And then my YouTube, Lucas Botkin, should be the first channel that comes up now. Newer channel since I left my old company. I don't have access to that one anymore. But I post a lot of my like behind the scenes business stuff. Like I think today I'm filming a video on the firearms industry and is it down or is it correcting, and some of the economics behind that. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in that video. A lot of business content for people that are more interested in hearing some of this. I used to just be known for gun stuff, shooting. I shot a lot. I'm pretty good at shooting. Doing a lot less of that now. And now I'm trying to transition more to sharing what I've learned. And again, trying to get young men off their ass as much as I can, to see that creating's cool, work's cool. And trying to do that the best I can. So YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Lucas Botkin as well. I mean, it's pretty easy to find me on there. And then my company, the latest company, the first one, we're starting a couple, is Adaptive Defense without the E. If you Google it, it should come up. That's our defense R&D company with some products as well. And then we're starting a men's performance apparel brand made in the US. Very difficult to do, but we're doing it anyway. We're working on that, and that should launch in Q3 of this year. So we want to create things, we want to make things, and that's the goal, that's the mission. So that's where people can find me.
And I will say, I got tipped off to the fact that the website was going live, and so I picked up a couple of your slings, right, just to kind of pass out to
thank you.
Some of my guys. And while I haven't used them, I just gave them all away. Yeah. Very good reviews. So, if you consider a review from some guy who hasn't used it, a couple people who has, if that carries weight, check them out if they're in stock. Yeah, man, that sounds really interesting. I've been, watching the development of your company, from a distance. I'm not going to pretend to be up, on every aspect of it, but it's really exciting to see what you've done, and it seems to be going well. So everyone check that out. As far as my stuff, Jay Burden Show, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. This is what I do. I'm a full-time podcaster. If you think there's value to that, throw me a few bucks a month. on Patreon, Substack, or Gumroad. I did the math on this not that long ago. It comes out to like 19 cents an hour for entertainment, which really isn't half bad. You still get all the same content on the regular feed. I just kind of throw a few ads in there to cover my mortgage. Lucas, thanks so much, man. This was a ton of fun.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on.
Keep your head up. Good night.